So one of the basic causes of the Titanic disaster that I think we can all agree upon is that Titanic was going too fast through a known ice region. And this is where we differ. It was accepted practice at that time for ships, especially these transatlantic steamers, to go at full speed, even into a known ice region, as long as there were clear weather conditions. That is the key right there. And the idea behind that is that these long immigrant ships, like Titanic, was considered an immigrant ship, long, narrow, propelled and steered from the back. For them to have maximum maneuverability, they had to have as much speed on as possible. The faster the ship goes, the more maneuverable it is. The idea was, she's going full speed, and there's clear weather conditions, she should be able to see a hazard in time to avoid it. This was a practice that had been borne out in the years previous. The low mortality rate on the transatlantic run proved this practice to work. Titanic would turn out to be the fly in the ointment and highlighted the flaw in this reasoning. We talked about the maneuverability, the need for speed, but the clear weather conditions. Now, much has been made about how calm the weather was that night. The sea was as still as a mill pond. They could see the stars, they could see the horizons very clearly. The horizon could be seen when the stars disappeared. Even though there was no moon, there's no light, but they still believed they had unlimited visual conditions. So, captain's night orders were to steam full speed. We know about, Lightoller tells us that Captain Smith came up just to check. You know, usually a captain puts out his night orders and expects his deck officers to follow him. He doesn't need to come on the bridge at night, but Captain Smith did, to check on conditions. He remarked on how still it was. He and Lightoller agreed that the weather was clear, so no need to change night orders. And as Captain Smith was leaving, he said, "Call me if it becomes the least bit doubtful." And I think as events would later indicate, what Captain Smith was referring to was the weather. If the weather starts to get hazy, starts to degrade a little bit, let me know. Because what a captain would do in that instance is he would amend his night orders to the deck crews. Maybe slow down. So the question is, did they really have clear weather conditions? Well, researcher Tim Moulton in the UK addressed this. And he decided to attack this from the meteorological angle. What he did was he went to records in England, France, Germany, America, everywhere he could, and collected all the data from all the steamships that went through that region at that time. He got all of the sea and air temperature readings. From hydrographics, he got the barometric pressure that night. Then he plotted all this out, and what he found was right where Titanic would eventually meet that iceberg, there was a clash of fronts. Cold air front hitting up a warm air front with probably the highest barometric pressure ever recorded, ever. These are conditions that are ripe for what is called a cold air mirage. And this is something that I've seen myself off of Newfoundland as we've gone out to the Titanic wreck. You can see these mirages, and in the daytime they can be fairly obvious, because what you'll see is something on the horizon will have a reflection above the horizon inverted and distorted. At night you can see it as different levels of lights. In fact, you could take, say, a passenger steamer with only one brilliantly lit deck, and the cold air mirage will make it look like a multi-layered. It could look like a huge ocean liner when actually it's a small steamer. Now this has impact on other parts of the Titanic story, specifically the California story. I don't want to go there with that today. But I just want to address what a cold air mirage would do to the horizon. It will also reflect the horizon itself, and will put an inverted version of itself just above the actual. And at night, this can basically lift the horizon. Basically, you think you're seeing a horizon, and with no distinct, like a town or lights or anything in it, just plain ocean, it's hard to tell what the fake horizon is and what the actual horizon is. And my take on all this is that a cold air mirage, based on Tim Moulton's collected data, was in existence at that time, causing the horizon to lift. And as the iceberg came into view, it was behind this mirage. The lookouts couldn't see it. They couldn't see it until it got close enough to break out of the mirage. And then it's close aboard. And then we know the rest of the story from there. At night, you'd be hard-pressed to see the edges of all this. You'd be hard... If you knew it was there, you might be able to pick out the original horizon line. So an iceberg can get closer and closer behind this kind of veil, and you might even get a glimpse of a little bit of the iceberg in between the two, or maybe they've merged together to become one curtain, or maybe you don't know what you're seeing. But if you're not aware it's there, you may just accept that this line up here is your horizon. Anything you might see down here might be, I don't know, something off the water or something. I don't know. So the point of it is, however it did it, it distorted the actual appearance of the iceberg to where the lookouts didn't recognize it as such. Now, the official story right now has a variant of that. They talk about it being black ice. You know, Lightoller started that. Maybe the iceberg had turned recently and it was all black ice. That's not what it was. In fact, Quartermaster Rowe back on the stern saw it pass by. He thought it was a windjammer with its sails set. It was not a black iceberg. This was a convention that Lightoller came up with because he didn't understand how the lookouts didn't see it. He's trying to provide an explanation of why they didn't see it. It's the best thing he could come up with. But there's no eyewitness who said, I saw it, it was black in appearance. Everybody else saw it and said, that's an iceberg. They knew it was an iceberg. And the lack of description insinuates that it had the normal appearance of an iceberg. To a layman or an experienced seaman, they all described it the same, which leads me to believe that it was white in character, as we expect icebergs to be, laymen and experienced crewmen alike. So the only thing that I can put forward to explain the crew's inability to spot the iceberg sooner than they did is that it was masked by this mirage. And you can get a sense of that in the inquiries when they're interrogating the lookouts. Now they start to talk about a haze that night. And that never came up before. We don't get any indication of that before. I mean, certainly Lightoller and Smith didn't see a haze when they were discussing the weather. Murdoch, I think, would have taken more actions had a haze developed because he was under the same instructions that Lightoller was under. So the only thing I'm left with is the haze is like the black ice, something that the crew is coming up with as a means of explaining what they couldn't otherwise explain. Why didn't I see that iceberg sooner? I should have seen that sooner. No, all of a sudden it appeared. Fleet said that it looked like two tables put together. Well, that's still pretty big for an object that a lookout is supposed to be seeing. We even have an eyewitness description that bears out what Tim Moulton's telling us about the boundaries of this cold and air mass coming together. After Titanic sank, Colonel Gracie, who's in the water, mentions this pall rising up from the spot where Titanic sank. And as it rose, it flattened out. What it's doing is this pall, whatever it is, steam, whatever, has hit the underedge of a temperature boundary layer, and then it flattens out. So they were literally right at that junction, right where these mirages could take place. So I think that it's not the fact that Titanic went full speed into a known ice field that is at fault for the disaster. I think it is that one caveat that they were missing: clear weather conditions. The atmosphere was deceptive that night. The Titanic's crew did not have the clear weather conditions they thought they had. And that's primarily what contributed to the disaster. And actually, Cold Air Mirage is a fairly well-known event along the eastern seaboard, especially in the Grand Banks area. I mean, I've seen it. Their fishermen going out of St. John's are very well aware of the phenomena, and they have been since Titanic's time and before. This is not a new thing. I mean, nowadays we can explain what causes it. They may not know what caused it in the past, but they did know it existed. So Titanic's crew could have known it was a possibility, but whether they were looking for it, it seems doubtful that they were. I don't know what the reason would have been for them to question what they were seeing with their own eyes.